Chag Sameach, everyone. It's such a joy getting to do 2-day holidays together, savoring every bit of joy from this festival. I want to tell you a wild story today. It's about a woman named Lakpa Sherpa. She grew up in Nepal in the shadow of Mount Everest. She was one of 11 children, born to a shepherd and a stay-at-home mom. And they were so poor. It was so hard to make ends meet. The family had virtually no resources. They couldn't buy the kids shoes. They couldn't afford to send all of the kids to school. And so Lakpa spent most of her childhood wandering through the mountains at the base of Mount Everest, barefoot. And during those years, she had one dream. And that one dream was that she wanted to climb Mount Everest. And she was skilled. I mean, she had talent. She had stamina. She had energy. Her mom used to get mad at her, was worried that she was endangering herself running through the mountains barefoot. But her dad saw that talent and would send her up past base camp to collect the family's baby yaks and baby lambs, to bring them down to protect them from the marauding animals. And she always would say, "I'm gonna climb Mount Everest," to which everyone else around her would laugh because there was not a tradition of women ever climbing Mount Everest. At 15, she decided she wanted to become a porter. A lot of the Sherpa who live in Nepal will work as porters. They'll carry tourist oxygen tanks and bags and tents, and they'll help the tourists to climb Mount Everest. And so starting at age 15, she would go to base camp and she would find porters and she would lobby to be able to become a porter. And these guys just laughed at her. No one would take her seriously. But she kept going for 2 years, begging, pleading, persuading, until finally she came before Babu Chiri Sherpa, who was a legend in his own right. He set a record for 21 hours on top of Mount Everest without oxygen. And he saw her and saw her determination and said, "Okay, I'll give you a chance." So at 17, she became a porter. And she worked her way up through the ranks until she was working as a kitchen boy, where she would hike up ahead of the tourists, set up camp, and then cook a hot meal so that when those climbers came to base camp, they would have a nice hot meal. And then the next morning, before they were up, she would be up and up to the next camp, ready, making them food again for when they would get there. Totally wild. But that wasn't enough for Lakpa. She didn't just want to facilitate other people's journeys to the top of Mount Everest. She wanted to climb Mount Everest. And so she went in 2000, after nearly 10 years of working as a porter and as a cook, she went before the future Deputy Prime Minister, Sujata Koirala, and convinced her to fund the first all-women's summit of Mount Everest. And she found 6 other talented women climbers, and they got together, they got the funding, and they climbed. All 6 of the other women she got to accompany her became very sick as they climbed and were not able to complete the climb. But Lakpa made it all the way up to the top of Mount Everest, becoming the second woman ever to make it to the top, and also made it down safely, becoming the first woman to ever survive climbing Mount Everest. It's amazing. Now, you think about this story, the first woman who ever lives through climbing Mount Everest. You imagine she gets down and there are newspaper reporters with microphones. "Lakpa, tell us your story. How did you do it? How did you survive? You spent 10 years training for this. How does it feel to be the first woman alive who's ever come down from Mount Everest?" You expect there's novelists who say, "Lakpa, tell me about your childhood. I want to write about the strength, the inner strength you cultivated running barefoot through the mountains with the baby lambs and the baby yaks. I'm going to make a motion picture." But she comes down from Mount Everest, and there's none of that. A few climbers are excited, but her story just kind of goes unnoticed. Not only does it go unnoticed, but she can't make a living. As the first woman ever in history to have come down from Mount Everest, she comes down and has to get a menial job to make a living. She continues piecing things together, working as a porter off and on, cleaning houses, climbing buildings and doing roofing. Whatever she can do, she ends up marrying a fellow climber who becomes abusive. They have 2 girls together, and then she has to run away for her life, and then life becomes even harder. But somehow she never is bitter about her life. She's never angry about the cards that have been dealt to her. Instead, she chooses to see her menial labor, cleaning houses and doing roofing and stocking produce at Whole Foods, as training for her next summit on Everest. And she teaches her girls through her hard work that anything is possible. She scrimps and saves and raises them and puts away just enough that over the next years, she's able to go back and climb Mount Everest another 9 times. So she's climbed Mount Everest 10 times, which, just to put that in perspective, only 34 men have ever done. It's a remarkable, remarkable feat. And yet, does anyone know her? Does anyone know her name? Is she celebrated? Who knows her story? So I read her story in the New York Times. There's a great article about her, talking about how she trains at Whole Foods lifting boxes of produce. And I was so angry that this woman, this incredible woman with all this talent, with all this potential, is stuck lifting boxes at Whole Foods, trying to piece things together, and hasn't gotten a sponsorship and hasn't gotten funding. And what is this? And I called my sister, and I was like, Sonia, I just read the craziest article. And I was telling her about it, and I was like, it's so unfair. I mean, do you think is it because she's a woman? Is it because she's a sharp? Like, what is going on that nobody sees her, that nobody gets her? And it's so unfair that here's a woman with all this talent, and she's stuck doing work that's not in line with her passion. And my sister said, I think it's actually an amazing story. And I was like, what? And just to give you some background, my sister, I'm sharing this with her permission, my sister has been struggling with chronic illness for the last 8 years. Every day, every morning, she wakes up in intense pain with vertigo and dizziness and all sorts of weird symptoms. And she's been through a parade of doctors and treatments and all of these things and has yet to find the cure. And every day is a struggle. And every day is a fight for her to regain her health. And when I told her this story, she says to me, this is exactly the story we all need. She said, you know, when you go on Netflix, when you open the paper, when you read a story, there are all these tales of liberation, of magic, where they minimize the struggles that people go through and maximize their amazing, amazing result. It's not, oh, J.K. Rowling was sitting and she was homeless and she had no hope and and you go focus on all the intensity and then she wrote Harry Potter. It's not, oh my goodness, they were never getting a job. They got fired for this and this and this and now they're a success. No, it's always focused on the then, on the happy ever after and never on the struggle. And my sister said, the truth is, all of us spend more of our time walking through the mud, slogging through the desert, than we spend in that promised land. And so stories about ultimate redemption are not super helpful to us. What we need are stories like Lakpa's. You need stories to know that even when you're in the thick of it, even when things feel most intense, the steps that you're taking, the work that you're doing, that makes a difference, that has value in and of its own. And on a personal note, just talking with my sister, I wish I had her kind of wisdom. We just a few weeks ago marked the anniversary of our egg retrieval and of all of our fertility struggles. And throughout all of our fertility struggles, I had the worst attitude. I was so angry. I was so upset. I was so depressed. Even when we did the ultimate transfer that resulted in this pregnancy, I was like, it's never going to work. It's worthless. There's no hope. I just had the worst attitude about it. And now it's easy to feel liberated. It's easy to feel like we've made it. But I didn't have that attitude then. And my sister, who wakes up every single morning in pain and every single morning in struggle, she has managed to cultivate this unbelievable power and strength that she takes every day as it comes, not because it's leading to some grand healing, which we hope it will, but we don't know what the future has in store, and she doesn't know what the future has in store. But what she knows is that every day has the potential for blessing. And so if she has an hour that she feels good, she goes out and enjoys her day for that hour. She has 2 hours, she enjoys those 2 hours. She watches great videos. She chooses to savor the blessings that come in life. And she chooses to treasure every moment for its potential to move her forward. Sonia says to me that Passover, the story of Passover, is dangerous. She says, you spend at the Seder table 2 seconds talking about 400 years of struggle and suffering and difficulty, and instead focus all of your energy on getting out, on making it to the promised land. It's good for a Seder. That story is good for a Seder. But what we really need are stories of people who are in the mud, who are in the muck, who are walking through the desert, who don't know if that ultimate redemption is going to come. Stories like Lakpa's, stories like Sonia's. We have to remember that even when it feels like we're not making progress, even when it feels like we're stuck in the muck, even when we don't see what's coming on the horizon, every step we take has value in and of itself. Just keep walking.